So welcome to another of our interviews for the Open 5G initiative. Today we're talking to John Merchant, who is Senior Director of Product Management and Strategy for Private Networks and 5G for Syniverse. So John, welcome. We can dive straight in. First question is, how do you view from your perspective that 5G is going to bring the enterprises and the mobile operators together, perhaps in ways that LTE didn't?
I think that's an interesting start here. You know, back in the days of LTE, the focus has really been on speeds and feeds and really creating kind of a deep bandwidth experience for consumers. And that's been good for what it is. We've seen some amazing developments in services and platforms over the LTE network. 5G is taking a little bit different approach. And really, when we think about the value of 5G, it really is focused on that enterprise experience. Now, certainly it's going to address a lot of the consumer requirements as well. But that incremental benefit is really going to be focused around enterprises. And it gets that way by deconstructing the network and being able to reconstruct network elements for a really flexible and customized experience for a specific enterprise need. And we've heard a lot about network slicing as a concept, but even, you know, even if you take the true magic of slicing out of it, the 5G network is really purpose built to provide that very customized experience. And so the network is really being built more to serve that specific enterprise need around things like latency, and things like high performance and control and security. These are big careabouts that really drive those valuable digitalization efforts that an enterprise has.
Right. So shift a little bit to open 5G. Right? We bring in new players. We open up the architecture a little bit more. What sort of new business models do you see coming from an open 5G ecosystem?
So the business models around open 5G, I think, are going to be, you know, first off, a lot more diverse. You know, we're in the business of actually clearing and selling data records for current 5G, or I'm sorry, current network roaming, and there you're tied into some very specific data elements that you can bill and charge for. So your billing and business models don't really have a lot of room to grow. Billing and charging evolution, which is the new GSMA standard around kind of NB-IoT, LTE-M, and then beyond into 5G, allows you to actually create data records and data rating elements in a lot more different and varied ways. And you can reconstruct those in ways that that allow you to identify value, track that value, rate for that value, and then charge for that value. So that means you can do things like massive scale IoT, which really isn't about bandwidth. It's really more about the scale of the devices that you're deploying to track. It's also around bringing different services together and being able to track usage of very specific services within a broader chain. And assemble those in ways that we haven't seen before. So that means specialists can come in a lot more different areas along that services. So we see, in our view, a lot of different ways to assemble services, ways to charge for services, ways to consume services. And the billing and the commerce engines around that are going to adapt accordingly.
Right. So with that, you can bring in some new players, right? Because it's not necessarily the traditional operators we've had, or those been involved in the LTE or 3G markets. So who do you see coming into the ecosystem?
We see 5G as really being a connectivity platform rather than an access play. And what that means then is that you can do a lot of different things with 5G as the base. I'll just give you a quick byline. In my prior lives and other OEMs, I did a business model for broadband and mobile convergence, bringing the broadband network onto the 5G core. I can't imagine being able to do that 10 years ago, but it's actually a very real concept now. So we're able to bring a lot more different access technologies into that play, a lot more different service providers. And so we see things like private networks, we see things like MVNOs. I suspect there's going to be a new entrant, and I don't even know what the acronym for it is now. But those network providers that do have facilities, but they're securing them via that open RAN concept, right? So they don't really own it, but they're no longer just renting a core; they're actually renting very specific elements of that radio network. So you'll see a lot of specialists coming into play, and those specialists aren't there just to provide another way to access the internet. They're there to provide a very specific chain of network services that are purpose built, custom built to drive a very specific enterprise application. So, connected vehicles with a slice of RAN leading to a mobile edge compute platform that goes then to the auto manufacturer's hosted core, and maybe has some services tied in around entertainment or diagnostics or maintenance services. All this comes together in a way that's very custom built for that specific end user.
Right. So you could have a specific application within a vertical, or you could have a specific vertical. So you could have a provider, a new company comes in and says, we've got services for hospitals, for example, but they don't own all of the network, but they are providing the services using all the components you're talking about, that type of thing.
Right, and I think we also see potentially some new ways that network operators can actually bring in a third-party content or service provider. Another example I've used in the past is, Netflix might have a new release. I mean, we all see these new releases coming in the age of COVID. But if they have a new release, they can tie it into a mobile slice, so that slice, which guarantees higher bandwidth, it's a UHD stream instead of maybe just an HD stream, that all gets embedded within the price that Netflix is charging. The consumer doesn't even realize they're paying for a slice, but they are, because of this new way that we can bring together services.
Right. Interesting. So you've mentioned network slicing a couple of times. You just did now and at the beginning. So we hear about this a lot. We hear about the benefits. What do you see as some of the challenges to actually deploying network slicing, and how can we address those?
I see a number of different challenges. One is around orchestration of the virtual instances you have to bring together in a network slice, and this, I think, is it's a new way of operating for network operators. It's a new way of operations for the industry in general. So I think there are some technical or operational hurdles that have to be overcome. I think another is, how do you actually design a slice template that has some common frame of reference from one operator to another, one industry to another. And being able to, kind of like recipes in the ways of thinking about it, ways that you can bring together these slice elements from different operators and different service providers, for that matter. And then a third one, I think, is, how do you actually bring them together? We're a company all about interconnections and interconnecting one network and another network. Where's that meeting place? And the answer, of course, is that there is no single meeting place, but you have to now adapt to these intersections. Maybe it's in the public cloud somewhere, maybe it's in our IPX network in another, maybe it's a hosted instance within the MNO network in a third. So I think there's still some things that have to be figured out about how you consolidate all these slice elements.
Right. So how do you see slicing, I'll say emerging, but how do you see it getting started? We talk about it a lot, but where do you think it's going to get its initial kickoff and then develop from there?
So I see slicing actually emerging initially in the enterprise market, and I think first off, slices were purpose built for enterprise uses, but I see with the emergence of private networks, there's these sandboxes where the risks are certainly great for the enterprises that are deploying them, but they're not impacting billions of subscribers or hundreds of millions of subscribers. So I think they're going to be a little bit more willing to take a risk in terms of experimenting and how these slices come together and advantage their operations. That's where I see things coming initially. And then, you know, the MNOs are also exploring slices as well, but I think those will be probably a bit more generic initially, you know, across maybe 8 to 10 different slice types. And then over time, we'll see them become increasingly complicated.
Right, right. So somebody's commented before that, you know, we're kind of like at this, it's almost like a perfect storm of innovation right now, storm being good in this situation. But, you know, we've got virtualization, we've got the cloud, we've got 5G, we've got the open 5G, open RAN movement. And of course, this massive demand for bandwidth. And you put all that together and you end up with, you know, a great recipe for innovation. So what do you see is, if we looked ahead a couple of years, what do you think we're going to see out of this? What do you think we're going to see in 2021 from Open 5G, for example, this movement?
No, I think one of the things is, I mean, I've been in the telco space for a long, long time, and you know, the telco development cycle has been centered around a very small group of telco engineers and those that are associated with the telco industry. What 5G does is it really kind of blows that paradigm apart and really, you know, just to overuse the term, it democratizes the environment of those networks, because they're using standards like HTTP2 and JavaScript and open APIs, and all of these have the intent of really inviting more collaboration with mobile network operators and those associated with them. I also think about, in my mind, you know, you've got a couple of whales, the old MNOs that are all chasing new products, and then behind them you've got this school of thousands and millions of fish coming along, and you know, a million heads are always better than 1,000, right? And so I think that we're going to see a lot of benefit just from opening the ecosystem. You've got people in, you know, parts of the world that never would have really been that kind of an innovation center now integrating in with the telecom market. So I see a lot of that happening. But the system itself is designed to be deconstructed, right? It's designed for the service operator to really pick apart those big functions, monolithic functions, break them down into microservices, and then reconstruct them. And what that also means that you have the opportunity for really cool innovators to come in with very specific microservices and substitute them. And you know, you've got the system around you know, interconnecting these networks and interconnecting these services that allows you to identify and authenticate service components and bring those service components together, deliver them to a customer, track that usage, create the data record for that usage, and then bill and provide funds back to those creators of that innovation. So the business models are also in place to reward that innovation.
Right, which is where Syniverse fits in, all that.
Absolutely right. You know, we've got our new service, Universal Commerce, has got blockchain built into it. And while that's initially being designed to do things like verify data records and secure those data records, in the future, that also goes out to verify participation, authenticate that participation, and really bring that bill of many multiple parts into a single verifiable data record.
Right, right. It's interesting, all the things you were talking about that are coming together, APIs, et cetera, all software based. Yep. So the whole, whereas telecom historically has been a switch, a radio, a device, is hardware with embedded software. Now we're with obviously virtualization, we separate those two, but the innovation now becomes software-based innovation, which, as you said, can be done any part of the world, and then layered into the ecosystem.
Right. That also kind of brings back this challenge we talked about earlier, which is, you know, you have to have very flexible orchestration systems to be able to drag and drop those software elements that you need to deliver that service to your customer.
Yeah, yeah. But we also could have, you know, 3 people sitting in a garage who are specialists in one very particular function for the RAN or the core or whatever. Whereas today you have to go to one of the big OEMs to get that functionality.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, So John, last question, and it's one I've thrown at a few people here. So if you're looking ahead for the next few years, obviously there's a lot of things that have got to happen with the open ecosystem, open networks, etc. So when you look forward, when do you think we get to the point where the majority of the contract awards, new awards coming down, the majority of them are actually implemented on open networks, open APIs, open standards, etc. And you can, we'll expand this for operators and private networks. When do you think we get to the point where the majority is open?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and one we've thought about a little bit. I'll kind of walk through more my take on the adoption cycle. We see 5G standalone coming out in the marketplace kind of now and into the first quarter. We've seen one. We'll probably see a few more over the next couple months. The initial focus is really going to be on just getting SA out there and getting it right. And again, standalone is that 5G core, 5G RAN, the 5G system. So I think we'll see a focus on that domestic deployment, meaning kind of within the MNO's footprint. We'll probably see some experimentation on the Open RAN side and the network slicing as well domestically in this same time period, but we won't really see broader adoption of either slicing and or the open hardware, I think, until 2022-ish, in a way that it's exposed outside of the MNO's network, and that it will take some time to become a majority. I think on the private side, that might be a different and earlier wave. As I mentioned before, I think there's more risk taking in private networks. I think there is a willingness to create networks in a way that meet very specific needs for those enterprises. And we're already seeing in the LTE space some of the real big players do their own network deployments in their own efforts to reach out to their constituents. So I do think we'll see some earlier development there. And in those cases, you're starting with greenfields, and for the most part, you'll probably see a lot of that open adoption from the get-go.
Right.
But that, probably start seeing that in the 2022 timeframe as well, maybe a little bit earlier in terms of earlier than 2020 plus, right? In terms of having it be more of a more significant in their deployments.
Yeah. Of course, with a greenfield, especially with a private network in a greenfield environment, it's relatively easy to do an open. It's controlled. You've got it enclosed.
Right.
It's all the same organization, etc. So.
Right. And you're also focused on cost. I mean, not that MNOs are not, but when you're focused on cost, you're also looking for best in breed, best in cost components. And the way that the open network is, open 5G is being created, mixing and matching these elements is a lot easier.
Right. Great. Well, for those watching, we've been talking with John Merchant, who is Senior Director of Product Management and Strategy for private networks and 5G at Syniverse. John, as always, thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Ian.